Lots of us are inclined to put our gardens into hibernation in November and not really venture out there again much before the first daffodils in early spring. But a stroll through these stunning winter colour borders at the Cambridge Botanic Garden make you realise just what treats you're missing. It has to be said that winter colour is more subtle than the brassy yellows and pinks of spring, the whole rainbow of summer colours, and the glowing reds and golds of autumn. And while there are flowers at this time of year, they don't take the starring role. It's the supporting cast that takes centre stage. Berries, if the birds leave them alone, foliage, the shape of a plant, and of course, bark. I mean, just look at this, isn't it beautiful? This is a variety of silver birch from China, and it has these wonderful, light, bright white stems, and you can imagine they'd lighten up the garden on even the dullest winter day. But when you look closely, it's not just white, there's all sorts of colours in here. Pale tan, pale gold, pink, and the fact that the bark's peeling in places just makes it even more attractive. This specimen's about 20 years old, and because it has such an open, airy habit when it's in leaf, it's a lovely tree for a small garden. Some of the maples are very good small garden trees as well, like the paperbark maple, Acer griseum, which has this lovely cinnamon-coloured bark that flakes off in the winter, and when you get the low winter sun shining through it, it really does warm up the garden. If you haven't got room for a tree in your garden, then there are some lovely shrubs to give you colourful bark all through the winter. Some of the willows, for example, like Salix vitulina britsensis, which glows like a bonfire, lovely shrub. And then there are the dogwoods, of course, with their greeny gold and bright sealing wax red stems. They're really good shrubs for a small garden because in order to get this bright bark, you need to cut them back hard every spring so they never get too big. And if you choose one that has attractive leaves later on in the year, like Cornus albor elegantissima with lovely pale cream and green foliage, then you've got a shrub that gives you good value right through the year. One of the things that makes gardens look so bleak in the winter is acres and acres of bare soil. And what I love about the planting here is the way they've used ground cover. There are wonderful billowing drifts of euonymus, the pale variegated silver queen, which is the perfect foil for the red of the dogwoods. And although the soil's slightly limey here, some heathers do very well. Things like this Erica crossdaliensis ghost hills, for instance, and the Erica carnea myoton ruby. Ivy will scramble along just as happily as it'll climb up, so that makes very useful evergreen ground cover. And so do hellebores, like this one, the unfortunately named stinking hellebore, with its dark, leathery leaves and pale apple-green flower buds. Prostrate conifers are worth thinking about too, although this magnificent beast, this is Juniperus virginiana grey owl, would fill a small garden all by itself, and yet you still see it on sale in garden centres under dwarf conifers. Evergreen foliage gives structure to the garden all through the year, but it's particularly valuable in the winter. After all, green is a colour too. And they've used it in just about the right proportions here. They've used lovely architectural evergreens like the mahonias with their great walls of jagged leaves that take on a lovely warm reddish tinge once the frost's been at them. And then, of course, there are the conifers, not just evergreens, but everblues, evergreys, and evergolds. This is a golden Lawson cypress, Winston Churchill, and it really is a glowing beacon luring people into the garden. Much too big for the average garden, of course, but you could get a similar effect with a golden thuya or even a golden Irish yew. As I said, the flowers in the winter garden tend not to be the stars of the show. although these aconites are doing a pretty good job at scene stealing. On the whole, flowers in winter are small and insignificant, until you get close, that is. And when you do get up close, you're often rewarded with a whiff of the most delicious perfume. Oh, that's lovely. It's sweet but not sickly. This is a member of the honeysuckle family, Lonicera purpusii. And the usual advice with these scented winter flowering shrubs is to plant them by the house so you can really enjoy the perfume. The problem with that is they tend to be pretty big, and once they're in leaf, pretty boring to look at too. Much better to plant them in an out-of-the-way corner of the garden, then in winter cut a few branches, bring them indoors and enjoy the perfume in the warm. While few of us have got enough room in the garden to plant for winter interest on the scale of the Cambridge Botanic Garden, you can certainly adapt the principles to even the smallest space, or even to a container. Some bright bark, a few architectural evergreens, a little bit of ground cover with the ivy, and just a few daffs to remind us that spring really is on the way. And you've got a really nice feature to brighten up the corner of any patio.
Now, every year about this time, I remind you to prune your butterfly bush, Buddleia Davidi, right back hard to within about an inch of the old growth. And I also jog your memories every year about doing much the same sort of thing with the dogwoods, the cornice. So this year, I'm not going to do it. Have a look at my willows instead. Now, the butterfly bush is pruned like that because it will flower on wood that it's going to make during this year, so you get bigger and better flowers. But with plants like the cornice and this wonderful willow that are grown for their bark, it's a little bit different. You get much better bark colour on young wood. So once again, to encourage that, you do exactly the same thing and prune it right back hard within an inch or two of the old wood. And don't forget, too, that if you have a friend who covets one of your plants, all you've got to do is to just cut a stick off like this, plunge it into the ground, and by this time next year, that will have rooted.
Do you come out here very often in the winter, Andrew?
I do, as much as I can, but if the weather's not fine, I look out the window all the time because there's lots to see.
Doesn't this dull, gloomy winter light put you off coming outside in the winter?
Not totally, but imagine on a really fine day how beautiful it is, when the sun's low on the horizon and so it casts really strong shadows, and especially the trellis here, which is built really to show the shadows in winter.
Is it painted, or is this a natural colour?
Well, it's stained originally dark green, but then on top we've got this beautiful algae which has come, in the winter especially, it's damp, and the algae really loves it.
It's just the sort of thing that you don't notice in the summer.
Well, partly because it semi-disappears in the summer. It gets much paler, it's much drier, of course. So in the winter, it's the rich green that looks so good.
But this is the time of year when we notice the textures and all the little things which are completely lost in the summer.
That's right.
Like the bark on this very old tree.
Yes, that's my favourite tree. Of course, we've designed the whole garden around this tree. And as you say, the bark looks great, but look at the moss on it as well,
Yes.
which really flourishes in the winter.
Almost tactile.
Mm.
You've got your own miniature avenue here.
This is my delusion of grandeur, Liz. I thought that if they could have a pleached lime avenue in stately homes, I could have it in my own little garden as well.
So you planted them all at regular intervals.
Well, they're regular now, but I've got to say that when I started, I miscalculated, and I got the spaces wrong. And I put them all in, and it was wrong, and they looked wrong, too.
Did
So I
it
had
feel wrong as you walked through?
Felt wrong. They've got to have regular spacing. And what looks good is the rhythm of an avenue like this, even in a small garden, I think.
Not just the rhythm, but I think people often feel they must put conifers in for green in the winter, but actually these seem to me to have their own beauty, especially as you look up.
Yeah, and I like the change of seasons. I mean, in the summer we sit on the bench over there and look through towards the church, through this sort of dappled leaves. It's brilliant. I love deciduous trees, really, and the difference between winter and summer is so good.
And in the spring?
In the spring, well, we underplant lots of narcissi, which are just poking through, and they're followed by hostas. The trouble with the limes, they take a lot of water from the soil, a lot of moisture, so even the hostas get a bit dried up.
You use every inch of wall space here as well, I notice.
Well, in a small garden, you've got to use everything you can. I've got mahonias trained against the wall behind us, and just here, this is Japanese wineberry, which looks good in winter because of its red stems.
Got a little bit of sun all of a sudden.
Isn't it lovely on this herbaceous border?
It's certainly bringing out a lot of different browns in these stems. But you're very brave to have left your herbaceous plants.
Well,
most of us cut them down and tidy up.
I love to leave them right through to the spring. There are two reasons, really. They look so good with frost on them in the winter, and also it protects them, the bottom of the plant, from the frost.
But you've kept the plants tidy by staking them up.
Well, you can't really see the supports. That's the idea. They're supported by bamboos, which are painted dark green, so it's meant to merge into the background.
Very unobtrusive. You've mentioned the dead seed heads, and these alliums do look very striking. But I just don't believe you. I don't think that they grew here.
I must say, it's in your honour, Liz. I do it whenever anyone comes to the garden in the winter. I get these dried alliums and I stick them in to fill the spaces that are a bit empty in the winter, because I love alliums. They look so decorative as seed heads.
So you dry them in the summer and hang them up ready
right.
to put outside in the winter?
And they're very fragile, actually. The first wind will blow them to bits, so they won't last very long if you leave them out. But I bring them out specially.
Very sneaky. But why not?
Why not? Yeah.
Got a couple of smallish trees on this lawn, presumably to replace your old apple if it ever goes.
Well, I love trees, of course, but in a small garden, they can be a problem. They can get too big, and I think you've got to be fairly brutal then and replace them if necessary.
This one's just coming into flower.
Coming into flower. It's nearly in the middle of its flowering, Liz. It's actually been flowering 3 months already, and it's got another 3 months to go. It's one of my favourite trees. It's autumn flowering cherry.
6 months in bloom.
Mm-hmm. And not only that, it's got good autumn colour. I sound like an advertiser for the tree, but it really is one of my favourite trees.
So when you entitled your book Performance Plants, that's the sort of thing you must have meant.
Exactly. A tree that lasts right through the season. Six months of the year in flower, the rest of the year looking perfectly good.
What other performance plants are there?
Close to the house, I put Euphorbia Caracias wolfenii. It's my favourite performance plant. And I grow it near the house because it's a bit tender and it gets a bit of warmth from the house. But look at it now, in winter, mid-winter, and it's already looking like spring. Inspired by Rupert Golby and what he does with pots, I've put together all these shrubs which look good in winter, the skimmias, and there's a hamamelis over there, witch hazel.
And it smells nice.
Great.
Every so often you just catch a whiff of it.
And just near, that's why I put it near the house too, because from my bedroom window we can smell it in the mornings. And that's the thing about winter gardens, that you have little incidents that are really concentrated. Lots of little incidents in the winter, that's the best thing.
Even in chilly old February, it's still possible to have quite a good display of colour, and mine comes from the wonderful hellebores, the snowdrops, of course, and these lovely hardy cyclamen. If you do want a display of early flowers like this, it's a good idea to group them all together, because, of course, you can't expect the lush sort of show that you would get during the summer. All these plants will happily seed themselves about. Just look at the way that clump of cyclamen there has spread since they've been in. Now, cyclamen are ideal plants for this sort of shady situation, and there are two that you can really rely on. Cyclamen hederifolium flowers in the early winter, and that's followed by this one, cyclamen coon, and that'll go on for about another month. Now, these plants need good drainage, but they mustn't be allowed to dry out in the summer, so before I plant, I put on a mixture of coarse grit and garden compost and just lightly fork it in. I reckon that the best way to plant them is from pots, because that way you can be really sure that they'll get established, and they'll soon spread and then they'll look smashing.
it's on precisely this kind of cold, damp, rather misty winter's day that you really long for a bit of colour. But of course in most gardens that's exactly the time of year where you really don't get very much. In this small garden, that corner is what you see from the house. So what we're going to do today is plant up a bed full of colourful shrubs that really will give your spirits a lift at this time of year. And because in a small garden everything really has to earn its keep, they're all plants that look really good the rest of the year as well. You'll need 1 Cornus alba elegantissima, 1 variegated false castor oil plant, 1 Japanese mahonia, 1 Sarcococca humilis, 3 euonymus emerald gaiety, 1 viburnum Gwendleyan, 3 Euphorbia robii, 3 Bugenia Bressingham white, 5 small or 3 large Christmas roses. You'll also need composted bark, slow-release fertiliser and chipped bark for mulching. Well, now we've dug this corner out, we can see basically what the soil's like, and it's really not up to much. It's very, very fine, sandy, dry. Part of the reason is that's the nature of the soil round here, but the other culprit is this enormous conifer hedge. That's sucking an awful lot of moisture out of this area. So what I'm going to do is dig in lots of organic matter, because that will make the soil much more moisture retentive and will give the plants we've chosen a much better start. Depending on what your soil's like, it should take 2 to 3 hours to mark the bed, dig it out and work in some organic matter. Although you've got a planting plan, it's not until you actually get the plants onto the soil that you can see what they're really going to look like. And this is the time to make any final adjustments while they're still in their pots. Sometimes it's just a minor change of position, but other times you might think one group of plants looks better in a different place. Well, now's the time to do it. It should take about an hour to put all the plants in. Well, now the plants are in, this is the final step of all, mulching, which means basically covering the soil to keep the weeds down and also to keep the moisture in. I'm using this lovely stuff today. It's chipped bark. It's really chunky, which means that slugs don't like it very much, and nor do cats, and cats are a bit of a problem in this area, but this stuff's so big that they just don't like getting it in their claws. Well, that's certainly a lot more cheerful, isn't it? It's just 15 months since we planted this bed and it's already looking very good. There's certainly a lot more colour here now. There's lots of spring flowering bulbs that we planted last autumn, the little daffodils there, and the pretty little white crocus snow bunting, blue anemones, and this really stunning little blue crocus. This one's called Blue Pearl, and it really does have a lovely pearly gleam to it. There's colour from the winter flowering shrubs as well. The sweetly scented pale lemon flowers of the mahonia are just beginning to go over now, but there's still plenty to come from the viburnum. This one is Viburnum tinus Gwendleyan, which makes a smaller, neater shrub than the ordinary Viburnum tinus, and it has pale pink flowers rather than pure white. There's still lots of buds on the hellebores too, so a lot more flower to come there. But of course our little winter bed doesn't just rely on flower for its colour. We've got the lovely warm red stems of the dogwood, Cornus alba elegantissima. And on the Euphorbia robii here, these little bracts are just beginning to take on the bright lime green colour, which really does give these dark, leathery evergreen leaves a lift. And let's not forget leaves. I mean, green's a colour too, after all. We've got the lovely big glossy leaves of the false castor oil plant, and in front of it the very small, very pretty pale cream and green variegated euonymus emerald gaiety. And all together they really do give this corner a lift and bring some much needed cheer into the winter garden.
Lenten roses are riding on a wave of popularity at the moment. One recent opinion poll rating them second only to the roses of summer. They deserve the acclaim. Opening long before spring and lasting a good couple of months, they really can bring a surge of early colour into the garden. Flowers do have the annoying habit of staring at your knees, but turn them upwards and you find these exquisite interiors with the central boss of stamens and this ring of nectaries underneath, which can be yellowish green or purplish black. Cleverly, the plants here are actually grown above a sloping lawn, so you can look up into them. This collection is one of the most celebrated in the country. It belongs to Helen Ballard, who more than anyone has been responsible for improving the quality of Lenten roses for gardens. It all began back in the 1950s when she was given 4 plants, 2 white and 2 purplish pink. She became increasingly fascinated with them, began taking holidays in the Caucasus, collecting plants, and then started hybridizing, using species like Cyclophilus and Baconiae to expand the colours into green and yellow, and Torquatus to produce these amazing great blacks. Cultivation presents few problems. They grow easily on any decent, fertile soil. It doesn't dry to dust in summer. In fact, they prefer the shade, and if you've got a gloomy bed under a north wall as here, or under deciduous trees where they can be illuminated in the winter, they're just the ticket. A winter mulch of well-rotted manure, compost or leaf mould always goes down well, and the reward will then be a good crop of self-sown seedlings. Hellebores have no morals and are extremely promiscuous, and left to their own devices, you never know what colour and characteristics the offspring are going to have. Another of the fascinations of growing them. Some gardeners leave their hellebores with their old leaves intact. Others prefer to cut them away in autumn or winter. Helen Ballard favours this approach, and so do I. The foliage tends to look tired and battered by the time the flowers appear, and can encourage the spread of black spot disease, the main threat to hellebores, which blackens stems and flowers. Removing them also makes room for spring bulbs and cyclamen leaves, which make attractive partners and a bright, clean foil for the flowers. Hellebores are pretty weatherproof, springing back quickly even after snow and hard frosts when the flowers become clamped to the ground. But if bad weather's forecast, it is a nice idea to pick a few flowers to bring indoors. They're notoriously tricky as cut flowers, but if you simply float the heads in water and bring them into a warm room only for short periods, they will last for a week or more. For me, both in the house and out, they're the star turn of the month.
I'm in the Cotswolds, an area famed for its beautiful gardens. Not much to see at this time of year, though, unless you really look, because this old wall is absolutely full of plant life. They're the forgotten plants, the ignored plants, mosses and lichens. Is a gardener and conservationist who believes that mosses and lichens can make good garden plants. Actually, Paul, I thought we were supposed to eradicate these things.
Well, some people do, but as a gardener, I've always found these plants beautiful and fascinating, and as such, I think they make very valuable garden subjects.
Well, what is so fascinating about them? Because most of us just take them for granted.
Well, they take them for granted because they don't see them, or if they see them, they don't really look at them. Lichens are in fact botanical communities. They're not just one thing. They're a whole community of fungus and algae that grow together, that are dependent upon each other for their survival. And as such, they colonize places that other plants can't get a toehold in.
Like walls?
Like walls. What we tend to do as part of our civilization is to create hostile environments. We create blank surfaces with nothing growing on them at all. Lichens, because they're specially adapted for very harsh conditions, can grow in these places. Mosses are our secret rainforest, if you like. Mosses are all around us. They're everywhere. And even though they're only a few millimeters tall, they act like a miniature forest.
Mosses and lichens certainly add to the atmosphere in this graveyard, but are they actually damaging the gravestones at all, Paul?
No, I don't think they're really damaging them. It's going to take centuries for them to actually break them down in any way. What the lichen is trying to do is to create soil. So it's working away at the structure that it's growing on.
Well, like here, actually, where I can see there are mosses as well as lichens. Has the habitat for the moss been created by the lichen?
Well, I don't think so. If you look carefully, you'll see that the moss is growing in one of the dents in the stone. And this is probably someone's name. And the moss are growing in the crack that would hold water, whereas the lichens on the top here are growing outwards from the flat surfaces. What they'll do is to eventually create conditions so that mosses and other plants will be able to get established on this surface.
How old might they be?
Probably 150, 200 years old, maybe even more.
Good gracious, what is their rate of growth?
Perhaps only a millimetre a year.
Now, supposing I had a new stone ornament, or perhaps a concrete ornament in my garden, and I wanted to make it look aged, could I go and scrape some off the local gravestones? No.
The last thing we want people to do is to actually go and collect lichens or mosses from the wild. The best thing to do with them is to leave them exactly where they are. What we can do with your concrete or stone ornament is to set up special situations to attract lichens and mosses so that they come to you. And the way you can do this is to paint or spray your concrete or stone with well-rotted manure, for instance, mixed in with plenty of water. And I'm sure you'll get something interesting from there.
So the moral of the story is create your habitat and the mosses and lichens follow.
Absolutely, yes. Set it up for them and watch and wait. Why not get rid of all those horrible lawns and all that grass and create a moss garden?
How would you go about doing that?
Well, we know what moss is like. They like shade, they like moisture, they like humidity, and they need to be protected from other plants that are likely to take them over. So it's trying to create those sort of conditions.
Thousands of people spend a fortune getting moss out of their lawns.
I've never been able to understand it, and I often think that the moss looks an awful lot better than the grass in a lot of our lawns.
I must say, when I walked into this garden, it's a winter garden that took my breath away. I think it's the simplicity of the Japanese style, but it's also the textures that the moss brings to the garden.
Yes, and it gives it a light and a magical sort of atmosphere, I think, as well.